Thanks everybody for having me back here. I think I was here 6 or 7 years ago, Greg, was it? Talk about Irish Confederates, my book on Irish Confederates. So I'm mostly somebody who looks at the war on the land, but I'm moving into the Navy. I know there's some Civil War naval experts here, so I'll give way to some of your expertise on that, because I would definitely be recruited as a landsman if I was actually recruited into the lowest rank, basically, the lowest rating. Excuse me, I got the wrong term. The lowest rating for the United States Navy during the Civil War. Thanks also to you as a group for being a sponsor of becoming a partner of the project. We appreciate that. We are supported substantially by the Arts and Humanities Research Council of the UK, but there are certain things, that are awkward for us to spend, such as for support of our website, for example. So your funds will go to help that. We really appreciate it. And you join other groups as partners, such as the United States Naval Academy Museum and the Delaware African American Historical and Genealogical Society. So we really do appreciate that. Just to give you a little bit of an outline of where we're going, so I'm going to introduce the project to you and the records we're looking at, what the naval records mean, what we can do with this. We're about a year into the project, so this is early days, so I don't have a ton of conclusions, but are the conclusions that I have are kind of tentative to talk about that. I'm going to show you some British and Irish case studies. Mike is right, about a third of the Navy. In the term of British in the 19th century, British and Irish would have been members of the United States Navy, which is quite a large number. And then also, this is in some ways a citizen science project, a crowdsourcing project, and we'll talk about that. And you're welcome to participate that through the platform we call Zooniverse. And I'll quickly conclude with just how you can keep up with what we're doing, and see also where your support is going. But I'm going to start by just outlining kind of the project and the records and what kind of our objectives are. So the project is called Civil War Bluejackets, Race, Class, and Ethnicity in the United States Navy in 1861 to 1865. And so the basic prime objective is to transcribe the muster rolls of the 118,000 or so U.S. enlisted sailors, common sailors, not officers, who served on over 600 vessels during the Civil War using the open access citizen science platform called Zooniverse. So that's the main thing, is we want to transcribe these records. These records are available currently on the NARA, National Archives and Records Administration site, but they're basically it's just digitized photos of the books, the muster roll books that were bound volumes. So you can follow them by ship. It's not even alphabetized. Some of you have used the NARA website. Off the record, it's not the easiest website to use in the world. NARA do great stuff, but their website is often quite difficult to use. And it's not searchable by name or anything like that, just by ship. So if you knew any ancestor that served on a certain ship, you can go look. We want to transcribe that into a searchable database. But secondly, we also want to link those names that we have transcribed and put online to other records that are available, such as the rendezvous rolls. A lot of these are on foldfree.com, which a lot of you are familiar with, court-martial records, but most importantly, U.S. pension applications, and especially the widows and dependents applications, which I'll get to in a minute. By 1893, almost 1 million people in the United States had some kind of a pension based on Civil War service, either for themselves or because one of their relatives, a husband, father, a brother, was involved. It was about 40% of the federal budget in 1893. So these are a massive pile of records. The cool thing, and they're slowly being digitized as well, some of them are available for free. The cool thing about the Navy is that virtually all of the Navy records, so we can look at all of the Navy records that are on there. For example, there are about 20,000 Navy files that are on there. When you say we were focusing on the widows and pensions, but to link names that we transcribed to if they've made a pension application, particularly if a widow or a dependent made an application where it would connect to those. So they become a rich resource for people who look for an ancestor, for example. Then it connects to other records that they might be on. Thirdly, it's a history project. It's supported by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, but it's also a library science project. So actually, we'll talk about the team in a minute. We have a number of library scientists on there who are going to teach us how to use AI, machine learning, all the buzz terms we use today, actually, to show you how to actually do this and make it easier on us to do it. Then finally, number 4 is we're going to use this big data generated by the project to write a new history of the common sailor, colloquially called blue jackets because of the short kind of shell navy jacket stuff that they wore during the war. So just to introduce the team, so there's myself at a probably the most famous spot of the most famous naval encounter of the American Civil War. You know where I'm at? No, well, somebody likes Mobile. I'm looking at Fortress Monroe, so that's Hampton Roads, where the CSS Virginia, the Merrimack, and the Monitor had their famous maritime fight. 1860. That's Chesapeake Bay, pretty much behind me there. So I'm the principal investigator. I'm a professor of American history at Northumbria University in Newcastle. My postdoctoral research assistant is somebody you know from this group, is Damien Shields. He did his PhD with me on Irish Americans, but again, an expert, a digital and public historian, far more better at that stuff than me. And of course, used them quite profitably for his work, Irish Americans. Not all the soldiers' pension applications are on there, but New York is, for example, so you get immigrants that way. And of course, he's at the Naval Academy in Annapolis at the Commodore John Barry, the father, Irish-born father, States Navy. On the bottom row, we have our, I won't introduce everybody, but we have our information scientists, and these are computer experts, particularly the chap here on the left, Morgan, and Adam, who's his PDRA, who are basically designing the machine learning for us. Because actually, what we're transcribing these records and we're having volunteers do it, we actually want to create a sense of data where the volunteers don't do all the transcription. They'll do what's called, by my colleagues in information science, called a golden set of data, and then use a machine, computers, powerful computers, to then maybe transcribe, to read 19th century. And so they're quite excited about this, just for our project, for everything else. The cool thing about the muster rolls is, you have basically thousands of officers filling out these different types of 19th century hand, and if we can train a machine to look what it looks like, what A looks like, G looks like, perhaps transcribers do maybe 10% of the data, and the rest of the 90%. We're doing a lot quicker and a lot faster by a machine. And then what we use volunteers for is to check. So you're not transcribing, you're actually checking. See what it's going. Initial findings, and this is hot off the presses, is on numbers, we're actually getting some good reports. Some of the things we're transcribing are about term of service and the ship's number that you have on board, and the machine's already reading the data. I'll talk. So that's where we're going. But just to talk a little bit about the kind of basis of it all, which is these muster rolls. So this is what they look like when you go on the narrow side. This is a bound volume, and then typical fold 3 ancestry. They just take a picture of everything, right? So they take a picture of the covers, and then you roll over and they take a picture of everything. See if this link works. Okay. Yeah. So this is the link where they are. On this links to also some of the ones that are still not available online, but you go down here, see that. But again, they're only searchable by ship, so they're available on narrow side. You want to go play with them and look at them along the way. Just go back to my. Am I on the wrong one? Let's continue the slideshow, Craig. Can I?
No, you come down.
Sorry, is it down here?
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I can't see properly. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah, so we have the muster roll. So the basis of the project, really. And so the roots actually of us discovering this is in a project some of you may have heard of. It's called the All Weather Project. It was done between the Meteorological Office here in the United Kingdom and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, in the United States, to collect weather data from naval records, right? Because ships took barometric pressure and temperature, all different points around the world, longitude, latitude, throughout, the 18th and 19th century. So they use a lot of digitized. They go in and they photograph Royal Navy records, but they've also gone in on United States, particularly the deck logs, right? The deck logs of where these recordings are taken. It's to look for climate change. What has changed over time. This is a massive project done between it, and we knew somebody from the American side, a guy named Kevin Wood, who unfortunately passed just as our project was about to start. Kind of suddenly, it was his kind of idea to transcribe the muster rolls, because basically he used to raise grants to transcribe these kind of deck logs for weather data, but he was, a bit of a salt himself. He liked to sail. He's interested in the Navy. It wasn't much use. The muster rolls weren't much use to the climate scientists, but he managed to raise a grant to photograph all these records. So he basically had this idea. Got all these things. They're on the NARA site. Wouldn't it be great if they were transcribed? So he came to us as historians as a way to do it. Maybe for graduate students to do it. I started a pilot project with Damien as a PhD student to look at some of the 7 city class boats. We'll talk about those in a minute. Just to do it, do it by hand using spreadsheets. What we discovered is we found some good, interesting things, that these were very rich sources, but also we were going to need a lot more help than just using us with spreadsheets and something like the universe. And we needed some information scientists to come in and help us. The muster rolls, there were various forms. As usual with the beginning of the American Civil War, everything was kind of ad hoc at the beginning of the war. Eventually, standardized forms are used. They change a few times between 1862 and 1865. A lot of them in 1861 are kind of just written out by hand, lined columns by officers taking these every 3 months, basically taking sailors that serve on the ship, and their ship's number. I'll show you some stuff that's on them. So every 3 months. So they're particularly strong from 1862 to 1865. For example, we have an issue with some of the brown water squadron, the boats that served in the interior rivers, particularly the Mississippi River. They were, of course, in the Army until October 1st, 1862, when the Navy took over that section. So actually, for some of those boats we'll look at in a minute for our pilot study, the rolls start in October 62. So it's mix and match, and some officers were better than others in terms of keeping it. But I'll show you some examples. So what's on these muster rolls? It's quite useful to genealogists, people interested in that, but also to historians. There's a lot of information on here, and of course, as historians, we want it all. My information science buddies, aren't names enough? We'd like as much data as we can from them, of course. Dealing with starting on the left-hand side, which is the ship's number, which is a number that sailors had on the boat, so they knew what their roster was for the day. You're up in the deck, so you're working on the sky from the way, all the way across. Let's see if we closer. Right, so you got ship's number, you've got names, you've got your rating. So LDS is landsman, the lowest rank. You have the date of enlistment. You have where enlisted, the term of enlistment. You have the receiving vessel. These were kind of recruiting training vessels. So that's the USS North Carolina, which is a big based in New York City. Where you enlisted. Other stuff we're excited about includes where born. So actually, place of birth is on there. If you're a citizen already, what state are you a citizen? Where's your American? Age, occupation, your eye color, your hair, your complexion, your height, and also remarks. Also remarks on there. Remarks are often left quite blank, but some of them are very, very interesting. Damien, for example, has done some work, and maybe I'll talk about tattoos. That often they reported what tattoos certain sailors had on there. For our purpose, one of the big purposes of the project, we mentioned that a third of these 118,000 sailors were British or Irish. We're also interested in the 20,000 or so African American sailors, because some of them literally were enslaved one day, and next thing in the United States. For the first time in official records, they will choose a name, pick a name, because if you know from the census, of course, slaves are recorded, but of course it's only age, gender, color, and who your owner is. But in the remarks, sometimes they'll put in contraband. You all know a term used for runaway slaves, or they'll talk about hair is interesting, for example, for us as well. So we just why do you want to know a guy's hair color? Because often they'll put in woolly hair, or black curly hair. They'll describe somebody who's African American. We're interested in heights, for example. Because maybe with big data, if we transcribe all of these, get all these numbers, we can look at how healthy people were in the United States Navy. Maybe, take all the Irish sailors, what's their average height? Take all the American sailors, what's their average height? Computers can do that for us. So we're transcribing a lot of this information. In fact, in the current edition we have of the universe, we have what are called workflows, 12 workflows, names, ratings for each kind of occupation, places of birth. But we'll show you how useful these things can be. terms of looking at in terms of big data, but also in terms of linking individual stories to what we call micro. Yeah, as you can see, some of the details are quite clear of where people are chips they came in. So how useful is it? So in our pilot project, we did these city class riverboats, basically, which were designed to fight in the interior rivers, mainly around the Mississippi, particularly for the Vicksburg campaign, try and get control of the Mississippi River and help Grant in its efforts to capture Vicksburg. They were built in Missouri, upriver in Missouri and Illinois, and have names like the Carondelet, the Louisville, all those areas, kind of Pittsburgh, along the Ohio and Mississippi and Missouri rivers. Of course, one of the most famous ones is the Cairo, named after Cairo, Illinois, which of course is now on display in Vicksburg. You guys been to Vicksburg, National America? Sure. Right, so yeah, the Cairo is one of those. So those muster rolls are available. So Damien got some volunteers that he knew, and it was just the two of us and about 20 volunteers transcribing the records of these 7 city class gunboats, right? Sometimes called poop turtles, right? Because they look like turtles in the center. Ironclads, right? So wood with ironclad. Again, you see the Cairo along the way, and quite useful actually in that campaign. For example, capturing Island number 10 and capturing Fort Pillow all the way. In fact, running, it was some of these boats that ran the guns at Vicksburg, right? That got south of Vicksburg, basically made the option of Grant flanking Vicksburg from the south. It's part of it. So here's some of the things we can get from we can look at how crews change over time, right? We can look at how crews change over time. So this is the USS Carondelet. That's a picture over there. And you can see the nativities. I've just picked nativities here for this one. You can see how we've visualized the data of the 1st of April, 1863, and the 30th of June, 1864. Green, we picked for Irish sailors, of course. Red is anybody who's white or Native American born. Yellow is from Great Britain, right? England, Scotland, Wales is what you're often. And although some of these may have been Irish, a lot of Irish immigrants were born in England or in places like Liverpool and Dover, but we're listed as British, so you can see a sizable. But for our story, what's quite interesting is blue is for African American sailors. So you can see in April 1863, just a few months after the Emancipation Proclamation, that the Carondelet, about a quarter of its crew is African American. But by 1864, it's up, it's up in the high 30s. What's happened? That basically the city class boats were involved in the Vicksburg campaign. After Vicksburg fall, the next big campaign is the Red River campaign, where they go up. The failed campaign of Nathaniel Banks to try and capture Freeport and get into Texas. But the boats go along with them. But one of the big things that happens with this Red River campaign is lots of contraband. Slave people run away to horses. So you can see that as they go along the Red River, they're recruiting more and more African American sailors. In fact, African American sailors are crucial to filling in. Navy's always short of sailors. In fact, throughout the war, they're pretty much always looking for more sailors, including getting the army to actually transfer people, try and get people to transfer from the army to African Americans for the gap. So there, from a transcription, we're able to show, and we've more of these pie charts. You can see them on the website as well, how the composition of the that as the war goes on, more and more African American sailors, particularly in the interior, in river campaigns, are important. So that's kind of an example of the data we can play with for every ship. Ultimately, for every ship we serve in the Navy. And again, computers can do a lot faster than we used to do it before. As I say, black blue jackets, African Americans are a key element of that. As you can see here, maybe about 30% of the Mississippi Squadron, those that serve in the interior, were African American. And again, these people took their names for the first time. So this is a picture of we don't know who the name of this black young sailor is. But we did find an example, for example, on board the USS Louisville. So here's a Louisville here, which served in distinction and was at the Battle of Grand Gulf, the famous fight Confederates on the land on April 30th, where there were 4 Congressional Medal of Honors given to crew members of the Louisville. But one of the people we found was a guy named Robert Foley. Now, why do you pick the name Robert Foley? Because literally he had been enslaved. He joined the Louisville in 1864 in Issaquah County, Mississippi, which is just above Vicksburg, and what today we call the Mississippi Delta. No, a place called Skipworth Landing. He joined the Louisville crew, and he served throughout the war until as a fireman, actually. So he helped work the boilers, and that was a pretty skilled job and a higher paid job than being even an ordinary seaman, because those people needed honorably discharged in July 1965. We were able to link him to a pension application, and that he'd been born in Natchez, Mississippi as a slave in 1837 or 38. He wasn't too sure of his year of birth. And that he had been, this is his words, a field hand and a house servant as a young man for his owner, under the laws of my master, is the term that he used. And in 1908, at 72 years of age, he applied for a pension. Basically, he couldn't work anymore. So he applied for it. Being such a gap between his service and when he applied for a pension, he actually got some relatives of his owner actually testified that he was telling the truth, that this is who he was and who he had worked for, including one of the most famous planters in Natchez at the time, a guy named Dr. Stephen Duncan of Natchez, Mississippi, who had plantations around Natchez, but also up the river Issaquah. So that's where he'd been working on cotton plantation in Issaquah County. Union had come and liberated him, and he joined the United States Navy and applied for a pension in 1908. There are a lot more stories. We feel there are a lot more stories like Robert's in these records. But again, it's from us transcribing the muster rolls, finding his name, then doing cross-referencing with the full 3 pension records that we found. Again, we're hoping a computer will do that for us a lot faster as we go forward. That's the interesting thing about the United States Navy. Why we're the fact that all these records are available is a great attraction for us. We can look at the Navy in totality because they're digitized, but also because, unlike in the Army, black and white sailors serve together on the same vessels. So it's not the 54th Massachusetts where you have white officers and all black enlisted men serving in the same unit. On the boats, black and white sailors serve together. That's quite unique. The United States Army is not desegregated until after the Second World War. The United States Navy is integrated, in inverted commas, or at least desegregated during the American immigrants. African Americans have always been a part, particularly on the East Coast, of the maritime tradition. But it raises interesting questions. There are a lot of, and I'm not a maritime or naval historian, but there are people, particularly the social history of sailors, people like Marcus Rediger in the States talks about that there was a certain equality on the sea that you didn't have on the land, where basically skills were more important than who you were or what your name was. And you could have black people, free people of color, telling white people what to do because they're a better sailor than you are. So how does that fit with the racial dynamics of the United States in the mid-19th century, where you're a white landsman and there's an able seaman who's an African American telling you what to do on the ship? So people see it as, in some ways, more progressive service, but how desegregated were they? How desegregated were they? There is evidence that black sailors usually kind of messed together and stayed in certain parts of the ship. Very few made it to, non-commissioned officer rank. Very few made it beyond ordinary seamen. And of course, there was only the rare case. I think Robert Smalls is the only one I've come across. Famous Robert Smalls, who stole a Confederate tractor and was made a pilot. Very few reach, or hardly any reach officer class. While in the Army, of course, you do have a lot of black NCOs, right? You have a lot of black sergeants. So it's rare here for them to go beyond the ordinary seaman. They could be promoted higher, but if they switch ships, the Navy put in a rule, they went back to automatically being a landsman. So you could have been an able seaman, so landsman, ordinary seaman, able seaman, a fairly experienced sailor to get that rating. If you switch ships, you went back to being a landsman. So there was discrimination in there. Is there self-segregation in there? Here we have a picture of the USS Pawnee, right? of an integrated ship. You can see black and white sailors sitting together. Some great pictures on line of the USS Miami, black and white sailors serving together. They were indeed, multi-ethnic, multicultural crews. So here's the Louisville again, which Robert Foley served on, and here's kind of the variation of where people came from. Sorry, we made the Ireland one. You can see that they're from all over the world. So 315 are born in the United States, but large numbers of those are African Americans. We have Irish are next, Germans, English 18, Canadians, Norwegians. We got a Swede and a Swiss crew member. Remember, the Louisville now is serving in the interior of the United States. This is one that's serving, in the interior. It's not serving in New York City or places like that. And we have one. Anybody recognize that flag? Extra points. No, it's Zanzibar. Right. So we have somebody from the Indian Ocean, born in the Indian Ocean, serving a person of color as well, serving on board the USS Louisville during the Civil War. Again, big data helps us to do this. The muster rolls help us do this because we have nativity of all the sailors that are along the way. So these are, say, multicultural boats. You have very, speaking different languages, people of different races, different religions, all serving, particularly on something like these gunboats or any kind of these ironclad, early ironclads. You're pretty tight quarters in here, right? So you're living very much cheek by jowl, as sailors do anyway, if you're in a big ship, right, hanging in your hammock. But again, we want to figure out, what were relationships like where these people are really close together? We know there is often conflict in the army between Irish American. Damien saw this as well. Irish American soldiers not like getting up a black soldier, and of them different regiments clashing with each other. How does it work on board a ship? I'm going to move on down to some case studies, but one of them kind of relates to that. So the first one I'm going to show you, talk about is again a story. We can get macro data. We also can get micro kind of interesting individual stories. So one of these is James Carey, an Irish immigrant who served on the Carondelet, who saw the kind of big data from earlier on. He was a quarter gunner, which is a non-commissioned officer position, and quite $25 a month, $11 more than we've got as an able seaman. So he's got a higher rating because he was listed as a mariner in the records. He's somebody who has sailing experience. So he moved up into the non-commissioned officer ranks on October 1st, 1863. He's lost his life when the Carondelet struck a torpedo, which in Civil War terms, is a mine. Basically, they call it mines torpedoes. So it's laid by the Confederates in the Mississippi River. So the kind of naval war continues, this kind of guerrilla partisan activity by Confederates laying mines in the Mississippi River. The muster listed his birthplace as Philadelphia, but we linked it to the 1860 census. We actually saw that he was born in Ireland. He came over as a child with his parents from County Offaly in Ireland. He worked in New York as an oysterman, so he carried his kind of sailing experience harvesting oysters out of Philadelphia. So that's where he got his maritime experience. But his parents filed for a pension because they said that when James died, they'd lost their major breadwinner, was the one who was kind of providing for the family. I won't go into too much detail, but the way the pension application worked was we had to show a relationship to the, particularly for widows and dependents, to show a relationship that you were married or you were a son of. You had to have some record that you related to the serviceman who had been killed, but also you had to show, particularly early on, that you were dependent on them. Somehow you were dependent on them. So things like letters from them saying enclosed is $20, enclosed is $10, or I sent so-and-so home with $50 was a way for them to show dependency. So often people pile in all this stuff into their evidence file when they apply to the department to get a pension. Often these were the last letters that these servicemen in the Navy and the Army had actually sent to their loved ones. And often, could you please send them back? This is the last thing I have ever written to me by my husband. Guess what? They're still sitting in the National Archives. See, they were behind it with pink ribbon, folders with pink ribbons on them. Now being unopened, what? They're photographs. And you've never. But one of the things that we saw in the pension file was that there was some. They had included some letters that had been sent by the crew. That basically the crew contributed to his funeral expenses, and he offered to pay for the funeral. And they listed the people who had contributed. We're able to cross-reference that with our now muster roll that we've transcribed and show that it's mostly Irish guys giving to the death of a fellow Irishman on boat, but also people who served with him. People who served with him, particularly in the armory side of things. So some of the officers and the other NCOs gave money as well who were not Irish. But in general, we see like his best buddies on the boat seem to have been people he worked around, but also there was a certain sense of Irish. So that's just a kind of a hint of these are desegregated, multicultural boats, but the Irish guys really hanging up with the Irish guys, and the black guys hanging up with the black guys. This is kind of an early case of where we see these Irish guys kind of hanging up together, which again is very useful to records. I want to move on now to an Englishman. We went from James Carey to William Churchill. And William Churchill described as English in the records. He brought some skills with him. We found him in the 1860 cross-reference again at the census. He was listed as a 24-year-old glassmaker. So he probably brought some industrial skills from England to the United States with him. English immigration was another project I did on another grant a number of years ago, which I didn't talk to you about, English immigration to America. Not Scottish, no, but English immigration to America. And there's, hundreds of thousands of English, but like Irish people who moved to America in the 19th century. But they're coming from urban areas. They're not coming off small farms in the west of Ireland. They're coming from cities and towns looking to get in on the early industrial revolution in the northeast of the United States. So it looks like Churchill brought some of this skill to New York City and was working there. Well, he married an Irishman, actually, in New York. And he served 2 stints in the Navy as a machinist. Again, a more skilled and higher paid job. Far more higher paid than most of the Irishmen who signed up as landsmen. So he served between 1862 and 1863, served his time, went out. He re-enlisted in 1864, and then he was a fireman on the USS Tecumseh, a monitor-type ironclad, launched in the Hudson River in September 1863. Commissioned into the Navy in April 1864, so basically goes into service as part of the North Atlantic blockading section, which is Virginia, North Carolina, to stop the blockade. Helped Benjamin Butler in his Bermuda 100 campaign in the James River. But in July, he was transferred to the West Gulf Squadron at Pensacola to take part in Admiral Farragut's attempt to capture Mobile, to close off the port of Mobile. And so the Tecumseh is involved in an action, the famous damn the torpedoes, not full speed ahead. Go ahead, right? The famous saying we have that battle, that's naval battle in early August of 60. Well, the Tecumseh, they're basically trying to attack this Confederate ironclad that's protecting the harbor, keeping under Confederate control, called the CSS Tennessee. And the Tecumseh is one of these monitors. You can see the round turret on it that tries to ram the Tennessee, which is a funded program. But of course, it's full of these mines. Basically, it hits a mine. These monitor class, we talked about it earlier, their hulls are skinny, very thin. Most of the armor is on the side and at the top. And it literally sinks in about 30 seconds. It goes straight down. It kind of gets swamped over in the waves, turned over, and 94 of the crew died, including in Churchill. So he goes to the bottom of the bay. It comes to still down there, I think. It is. They talked about, they had a look, didn't they? Talked about bringing it up in the 60s, but they couldn't get the money to bring it up. It's still at the bottom.
It's not happening.
No.
It's very happening.
Yes. So a bit like the USS Arizona, it's going to stay in Pearl Harbor. It's going to stay down. So William Churchill, English immigrant, is still down there. How do we know this about, because again, his widow applies for a pension. Get the story of William Churchill. I said pensions are key here, and I'm going to finish with one last person's story of a British immigrant. This one from Wales, actually, a Welsh immigrant by the name of Isaac Balch. Although he's listed in the muster roll I won't click on it again because I don't want to mess it up. I've clicked to his role there. He's listed as born in England, but he's born in Newport, South Wales, or Carlion, just suburb of Newport. So, yeah, you're Welshman. But he too has kind of sailing experience because Carlion, I think, was a port, like was a river port, So he comes as a mariner. The river Esk. I think the Romans built the fort there. I've been in Newport there. He found himself in Boston at the start of the war. He basically sailed the seas as a merchant seaman. Found himself in Boston, started the war, joins the United States Navy in May 1861. Served on a number of vessels, and then he serves as the quarter gunner on a monitor called the USS Passaic, a new type of monitor type ship in early 1864, built in Brooklyn. And in fact, it was commissioned in November 1862, and Lincoln visited at the Washington Navy Yard. Initially in the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron, it was moved to the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron, mainly focusing on Charleston in 1863. It took part in operations against Charleston. He was honorably discharged. Vulture was honorably discharged in June 1865 in New York. And he went back to his seafaring ways, including going back and settling back in Newport, back in Carlion, in Wales. So he sailed out of there, basically doing trade between Europe and there. He married one Annie Morgan, a 24-year-old, in 1875. By 1887, he had 6 children. Pretty prolific. He's no John Bell Hood, but he's pretty prolific. Right? But there'd be no more children because in 1888 he sailed from the port of Newport on a steamer to Bilbao to deliver coal. On the way back, his ship is lost in the Bay of Biscay. All hands on deck, gone. In fact, if you look in the records, it says they don't know what the 28th or the 29th. They're not sure what day happened. The ship disappeared. This is 1886. A widow and 6 kids left behind. In 1890, the United States government the War Department changes the law that basically says if you served at all in any capacity, you don't have to prove a wound or whatever. You're incapacitated now and you served at all. Thanks to the lobbying of the Grand Army of the Republic, right? You can apply for the U.S. military pension. Somehow she gets word of this in South Wales because she hires an agent. Well, these agents are there to make this. So, these agents charge you $10 to put in your application. So in 1890, she makes an application. Annie Morgan, who's never set foot in the United States, right? And her husband, she married in 1875, long after his service. She applies for a pension in 1890 through this attorney and for money. So to get $8 a month and $2 for each dependent, reach out for kids that are 16 or under. Initially, she's declined because they say she's not a United States citizen, but they clarify the rules and basically say she doesn't have to be a United States citizen to get it. So in 1893, she is awarded a pension. She's awarded a pension for her and her children. So about $15 a month. I looked it up in one of these kind of online converted and started about £5 a month, which in 1893 is pretty decent money. Pretty decent money. And it was so she gets this money. Get this. Until 1933, she's still receiving her pension until 1933. She dies. So here's a copy. This is actually from Fold 3. Right? These are actually records from Fold 3, pension record. In 1933, one of her children writes to the United States government and says, "My mother has passed away, but she had received her last payment on such and such a day. But there was 2 weeks gone while she was died. Can we still get the 2 weeks she's entitled to? And what about the funeral expenses?" Right? The U.S. consul in Cardiff is involved, and basically they get a response saying, "You can fill out a form to get the 2 weeks money you're owed from your late mother, and we will pay. You keep it. We will pay. The United States government will pay for the expenses of this woman's funeral." In 1933 in Newcastle. So this is just the richness of it. I googled Annie Morgan actually, and I found that somebody done some genealogy on her. She died in 1933. She had 15 grandchildren. So there's probably great grandchildren, some 15 grand. Anyway, so these are things we can explore in the future. But there's a classic example of how rich the pension was. We get a story of all kinds of things here from Isaac and Annie Balch. So just to conclude, I mean, the macro take, things takeaways from this project is, we can tell the importance of immigrant African American sailors, even more so than in the army. We all recognize the importance of immigrant soldiers and African Americans. People like Joe Glatter says that African Americans won the war by fighting this one, but they're more vital, I think, actually, to the United States Navy, and maybe we can see that. Secondly, the idea of a desegregated race is complicated. Yeah, it is a desegregated compared to the army, but how desegregated is it? And ultimately, it also tells really important things about working class life in America, in Ireland, among former slaves, in South Wales, right? It tells us a lot about the social history of regular folk in the mid to late 19th, even into the 20th century on both sides of the Atlantic. That's why they're so rich. The micro takeaways, looking at these stories, like I've just told you there, is the varied and sophisticated lives that 19th century people lived. We've lots of other stories of guys who have, because you had to other prove that you'd never been married to somebody else have a family. We have guys who start families, abandon them, and then the two widows apply for a pension after the war, and and then nobody gets a pension, right? Because he's kept, a secret family around the United States. Here's this Annie Morgan in South Wales figuring out I can get a United States military pension. What's going on there? These folk are a lot more sophisticated and more global. We think we are now because of the internet and all that, but we're more global than we are. And the importance of communication or the lack thereof, these guys who go off as second families and people who don't know about it. Literally, they come onto the government's radar screens. How the government comes into your lives, giving African Americans a chance to record their names for the first time. So it's important. I think it's important work. It's going to be. This is early days. It's only about a year in. We're still creating the kind of golden set of data through our volunteers, and so we're still recruiting. We want you, my Uncle Sam. We want you for the Zooniverse. And I will click on this link. We've got a mouse here, just to show you what it looks like. So yeah, so this is the Civil War. Climb aboard, help us uncover, and you have to register for Zooniverse. You can register, but it's quite straightforward. You don't have to put in your real name. Just to register and agree kind of the terms and conditions that you allow us to use the data that you transcribe. We have lots of help. Damien's put on a lot of stuff of, there's a field guide, there's all these tutorials you can follow about how to do it. But just to show you kind of how it works, you say, I'm ready to classify, right? So I'm ready to classify. So we have the first question we always ask is there a, so you've got these little tutorials you can follow through here. Welcome aboard. Yes, we realize some people don't read these, but because they ask questions as chat, we're so, sorry, I need to go back. So we ask always, is there a, and we'll say no on that one. And then what we do is we ask you to, let's go into this one here. So we've got eyes here. You can pick. Normally you can pick what you want to do. Names, you can pick whatever one you do. This one is randomly given me. Names, so we'll just say trace a box around eyes, hair, color, and complexion. Right, so where are we? So the first thing we have to do is, I'm not going to transcribe. So what it does is it puts it like that. Now, why are we putting the box in there? Because normally we just say, first of all, it lines it up for you. You can type it in, and you say okay, and it takes you down to the next one, and they're different colors. But the box is a very, very key element for us, for the information scientists. Because basically what the machine is doing, what they're writing programs to do, is that all these thousands of boxes that we have, that is the number 2 there. This person was 5'2". That's a number 2 in this thing. And the machine will go through and look for similar 2s. And the machine is learning what a 2 looks like. Because we had to, by putting in the box, we can work out the coordinates, tell the computer how to do it. Some people say, why are we doing these boxes? They are kind of, it's a bit tricky, but the boxes are key for information scientists for us to teach machine learning. And you kind of go down to the list. Sometimes it's 50, we've only got maybe a dozen in this, but you can do as little or as many as you want. You can pick up as you want. Nativity seems to be quite popular. So people like sometimes easy ones, the numbers, just terms, because it's quite easy and straightforward to do. But we have pushing 800 volunteers who work on it now. We've had 20,000 classifications, just basically people doing this information. So that's kind of what it looks like. Zooniverse is a great platform. It's a free, open to use. You can do it if you want to do a project yourself, a transcription project, put up a diary. You can jump through their hoops and then they will promote it, beta test and do all that, but anybody can go on there. It's an open source. It's based in Cambridge University. Quote unquote hard scientists used to use it a lot, looking at pictures of planets and what stars do you see, and you click on that kind of stuff. But more and more humanities folk are getting involved. One of the projects we got inspired by and kind of took some of their ideas was called HMS NHS, about a hospital ship that sat here on the Thames. So the Maritime Museum is involved in that, where they're transcribing kind of the record books of that. There's Bentham's diaries are being transcribed this way. Ours is a lot easier than Bentham's diaries. But I'm going to get my students involved. Drew Fogstreet wrote an article recently for the Atlantic Monthly about will the historians of the future be able to read cursive writing? They don't do cursive writing. Well, our students of today. So I always push them to read these records in the original hand, but maybe we'll have machines that won't do it. Am I right here again now? Yeah, this one. Yeah. So that's what it looks like on the Zooniverse. Let's talk about that. So just to finish up, if you are interested, please look at the website where some of these stories are on there in our blog. So we pull all these stories from our blogs, where you have the kind of macro information. YouTube, you have Damien if you're, kind of a nerdy crowd. If you're interested, like the intricacies of these records and how we transcribe them. He has YouTube videos on how to do that. We're on Facebook, of course, and we also promote ourselves on Twitter, and that's the same.